This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Love Conquers All by Robert C. Benchley. Recorded by Ted DeLorme in Fort Mill, South Carolina during July and August 2006. Chapter 31. How to Understand International Finance. It is high time that someone came out with a clear statement of the international financial situation. For weeks and weeks, officials have been rushing about, holding conferences and councils, and having their pictures taken going up and down the steps of buildings. Then, after each conference, the newspapers have printed a lot of figures showing the latest returns on how much Germany owes the bank. And none of it means anything. Now, there is a certain principle which has to be followed in all financial discussions involving sums over $100. There is probably not more than $100 in actual cash in circulation today. That is, if you were to call in all the bills and silver and gold in the country at noon tomorrow and pile them up on the table, you would find that you had just about $100, with perhaps several Canadian pennies and a few peppermint lifesavers. All the rest of the money you hear about doesn't exist. It is conversation money. When you hear of a transaction involving $50 million, it means that one firm wrote 50 million on a piece of paper and gave it to another firm. And the other firm took it home and said, "Look, Mama, I got $50 million. But when Mama asked for $1.25 out of it to pay the man who washed the windows, the answer probably was that the firm hadn't got more than 70 cents in cash. This is the principle of finance. So long as you can pronounce any number above 1,000, you have got that much money. You can't work this scheme with the shoe store man or the restaurant owner, but it goes big on Wall Street or in international financial circles. This much understood, we see that when the Allies demand 132 billion gold marks from Germany, they know very well that nobody in Germany has ever seen 132 billion gold marks, and never will. A more surprised and disappointed lot of boys you couldn't ask to see than the Supreme Financial Council would be if Germany were actually to send them a money order for the full amount demanded. What they mean is that, taken all in all, Germany owes the world 132 billion gold marks, plus carfare. This includes everything: breakage, meals sent to the room, goodwill, everything. Now, it is understood that if they really meant this, Germany couldn't even draw cards. So the principle on which the thing is figured out is as follows. Watch this closely. There's a trick in it. You put down a lot of figures, like this. Any figures will do, so long as you can't read them quickly. 132 billion gold marks. $33 billion on a current value basis. $21 billion on reparation accounts, plus 12.5% yearly tax on German exports. 11 billion goldfish. $1.35 amusement tax. 866,000 miles, diameter of the sun. 2 billion. 27 billion. 31 billion. Then you add them together and subtract the number you first thought of. This leaves 11. And the card you hold in your hand is the 7 of diamonds. Am I right? Chapter 32. 'Twas the night before summer. An imaginary watch night with the weatherman. It was 11 o'clock on the night of June 20th. We were seated in the office of the Weather Bureau on the 29th floor of the Whitehall building, the weatherman and I, and we were waiting for summer to come. It was officially due on June 21st. We had the almanac's word for it. And years of precedent. But still the weatherman was skeptical. It had been a hard spring for the weatherman. Day after day he had been forced to run a signed statement in the daily papers to the effect that sometime during that day there would probably be showers. And day after day, with a ghastly consistency, his prophecy had come true. People had come to dislike him personally. Old jokes about him were brought out and oiled and given a trial spin down the road a piece before appearing in funny columns and vaudeville skits. And the sporting writers, frenzied by the task of filling their space with nothing but tables of batting averages, had become positively libelous. And now summer was at hand, and with it the promise of the sun. The weatherman nibbled at his thumbnail. The clock on the wall said 11:15. "It just couldn't go back on us now," he said plaintively, "when it means so much to us. It always has come on the 21st. There was not much that I could say. I didn't want to hold out any false hope, for I am a child in arms in matters of astronomy, or whatever it is that makes weather. I often remember hearing my father tell, I ventured, how every year on the 21st of June, summer always used to come, rain or shine, until they came to look for it on that date, and to count from then as the beginning of the season. It seemed as if—" "I know," he interrupted, "but there have been so many upsetting things during the past 12 months. We can't check up this year by any other years. All we can do is wait and see." A gust of wind from Jersey ran along the side of the building, shaking at the windows. The weatherman shuddered and looked out of the corner of his eye at the anemometer register, which stood on a table in the middle of the room. It indicated whatever anemometers do indicate when they want to register bad news. I considerately looked out at the window. "You've no idea," he said at last in a low voice, "of how this last rainy spell has affected my home life. For the first 2 or 3 days, although I got dark looks from slight acquaintances, there was always a cheery welcome waiting for me when I got home, and the little woman would say, 'Never mind, Ray. It will soon be pleasant, and we all know that it's not your fault anyway.' But then, after a week had passed and there had been nothing but rain and showers and rain, I began to notice a change. When I would swing in at the gate, she would meet me and say in a faraway voice, 'Well, what is it for tomorrow?' And I would have to say, 'Probably cloudy, with occasional showers and light easterly gales,' at which she would turn away and bite her lip, and once I thought I saw her eyelashes wet. Then one night the break came. It had started out to be a perfect day, just such as one reads about, but along about noon it began to cloud over, and soon the rain poured down in rain gauges full. I was all discouraged, and as I wrote out the forecast for the papers, rain tomorrow and Friday, I felt like giving the whole thing up and going back to Vermont to live. When I got home, Alice was there with her things on, waiting for me. "You needn't tell me what it's going to be tomorrow," she sobbed. "I know. Everyone knows. The whole world knows. I used to think that it wasn't your fault, but when the children come home from school crying because they have been plagued for being the weatherman's children, when every time I go out I know that the neighbors are talking behind my back and saying, 'How does she stand it?' When every paper I read, every bulletin I see, stares me in the face with great letters saying, 'Weatherman predicts more rain,' or 'Lynch the weatherman and let the baseball season go on,' then I think it is time for us to come to an understanding. I am going over to Mother's until you can do better." The weatherman got up and went to the window. Out there, over the battery, there was a spot casting a sickly glow through the cloud banks which filled the sky. "That's the moon up there behind the fog," he said, and laughed a bitter cackle. It was now 11:45. The thermograph was writing busily in red ink on the little diagrammed cuff provided for that purpose, writing all about the temperature. The weatherman inspected the fine, jagged line as it leaked out of the pin on the chart. Then he walked over to the window again and stood looking out over the bay. "You'd think that people would have a little gratitude," he said in a low voice, "and not hit a man who has done so much for them. If it weren't for me, where would the art of American conversation be today? If there were no weather to talk about, how could there be any dinner parties or church sociables or sidewalk chats? All I have to do is put out a real scorcher or a continued cold snap, and I can drive off the boards the biggest news story that was ever launched, or draw the teeth out of the most delicate international situation. I have saved more reputations and social functions than any other influence in American life. Yet here, when the Home Office sends me a rummy lot of weather, over which I have no control, everybody jumps on me." He pulled savagely at the window shade and pressed his nose against the pane in silence for a while. There was no sound but the ticking of the anemometer and the steady scratching of the thermograph. I looked at the clock. 11:47. Suddenly the telegraph over in the corner snapped like a bunch of firecrackers. In a second the weatherman was at its side, taking down the message. "New Orleans, Louisiana. Heavy precipitation. Southwesterly gales. Letter follows. New Orleans, United States Weather Bureau." "Poor fellow," muttered the weatherman, who even in his own tense excitement did not forget the troubles of his brother weather prophet in New Orleans. "I know just how he feels. I hope he's not married." He glanced at the clock. It was 11:56. In 4 minutes summer would be due, and with summer a clearer sky, renewed friendships, and a united family for the weatherman. If it failed him, I dreaded to think of what might happen. It was 29 floors to the pavement below, and I am not a powerful man physically. Together we sat at the table by the thermograph and watched the red line draw mountain ranges along the 50-degree line. From our seats we could look out over the Statue of Liberty and see the cloud-dimmed glow which told of a censored moon. The weatherman was making nervous little pokes at his collar, as if it had a rough edge that was cutting his neck. Suddenly he gripped the table. Somewhere a clock was beginning to strike 12. I shut my eyes and waited. 10, 11, 12. "Look, newspaper man, look!" he shrieked, and grabbed me by the tie. I opened my eyes and looked at the thermograph. At the last stroke of the clock, the red line had given a little final quaver on the 50-degree line, and then had shot up like a rocket until it struck 72 degrees and lay there trembling and heavy like a runner after a race. But it was not at this that the weatherman was pointing. There, out in the murky sky, the stroke of 12 had ripped apart the clouds, and a large milk-fed moon was fairly crashing its way through, laying out a straightaway course of silver cinders across the harbor, and in all parts of the heavens stars were breaking out like a rash. In 2 minutes it had become a balmy, languorous night. Summer had come. I turned to the weatherman. He was wiping the palms of his hands on his hips and looking foolishly happy. I said nothing. There was nothing that could be said. Before we left the office, he stopped to write out the prophecy for Wednesday, June 21st, the first day of summer. Fair and warmer, with slowly rising temperature. His hand trembled so as he wrote that he forgot the final E. Then we went out, and he turned towards his home. On Wednesday, June 21st, it rained. Chapter 33. Welcome home, and shut up. There are a few weeks which bid fair to be pretty trying ones in our national life. They will mark the return to the city of thousands and thousands of vacationists after 2 months or 2 weeks of feverish recuperation, and there is probably no more obnoxious class of citizen, taken end for end, than the returning vacationist. In the first place, they are all so offensively healthy. They come crashing through the train shed all brown and peeling, as if their health was something they had acquired through some particular credit to themselves. If it were possible, some of them would wear their sunburned noses on their watch chains, like Phi Beta Kappa keys. They have got so used to going about all summer in bathing suits and shirts open at the neck that they look like professional wrestlers in stiff collars and seem to be on the point of bursting out at any minute. And they always make a great deal of noise getting off the train. "Where's Bessie?" they scream. "Ned, where's Bessie? Have you got the thermos bottles? Well, here's the old station just as it was when we left it. Wallace, you simply must carry your pail and shovel. Mama can't carry everything, you know. Mama told you that if you wanted to bring your pail and shovel home, you would have to carry it yourself. Don't you remember Mama told you, Wallace? Wallace, listen! Edna, have you got Bessie? Harry's gone after the trunks. At least he said that was where he was going. Look, there's the Dexter building looking just the same, big as life and twice as natural. I know, Wallace, Mama's just as hot as you are. But you don't hear Mama crying, do you? I wonder where Bert is. He said he'd be down to meet her, sure. Here, give me that cape, Lillian. You're dragging it all over the ground. Here's Bert. Woo-hoo, Bert! Here we are. Spencer, there's Daddy. Woo-hoo, Daddy! Junior, wipe that gum off your shoe this minute. Where's Bessie? And so they go all the way out into the street and the cab and home. Millions of them. It's terrible. And when they get home, things are just about as bad, except there aren't so many people to see them. At the sight of 8 Sunday and 62 daily papers strewn over the front porch and lawn, there are loud screams of imprecation at Daddy for having forgotten to order them stopped. Daddy insists that he did order them stopped, and that it is that damn fool boy. I guess you weren't home much during July, says Mama bitterly, or you would have noticed that something was wrong. Daddy didn't join the family until August. There were no papers delivered during July, said Daddy very firmly and quietly. At least I didn't see any, stepping on one dated July 19th. The inside of the house resembles some place you might bet a man $100 he daren't spend the night in. Dead men's feet seem to be protruding from behind sofas, and there is a damp smell as if the rooms have been closed pending the arrival of the coroner. Junior runs upstairs to see if his switching engine is where he left it, and comes falling down the stairs, panting with terror, announcing that there is something in the guest room. At that moment there is a sound of someone leaving the house by the back door. Daddy is elected, by popular vote, to go upstairs and see what has happened, although he insists that he has to wait downstairs, as the man with the trunks will be there at any minute. After 5 minutes of cagey maneuvering around the hall outside the guest room door, he returns looking for Junior, saying that was simply a pile of things left on the bed covered with a sheet. Then comes the unpacking. It has been estimated that in the trunks of returning vacationists, taking this section of the country as a whole, the following articles will be pulled out during the next few weeks: sneakers full of sand, bathing suits still damp from one last swim, dead tennis balls, last month's magazines bought for reading in the grove, shells and pretty stones picked up on the beach for decoration purposes for which there has suddenly become no use at all, horseshoe crabs salvaged by the children who refuse to leave them behind, lace scarfs and shawls bought from itinerant Armenians, remnants of tubes formerly containing sunburn ointment, half-filled bottles of citronella, and white shoe dressing, white flannel trousers ready for the cleaners, snapshots showing Ed and Molly on the beach in their bathing suits, snapshots which show nothing at all, faded flowers, dance cards, and assorted sentimental objects calculated to bring up tender memories of summer evenings, uncompleted knit sweaters. Then begins the tour of the neighborhood, comparing summer vacation experiences. To each returning vacationist, it seems as if everyone in town must be interested in what he or she did during the summer. They stop perfect strangers on the street and say, "Well, a week ago today at this time, we were all walking up to the post office for the mail. Right out in front of the post office were the fish houses, and you ought to have seen Billy one night leading a lobster home on a string. That was the night we all went swimming by moonlight." "Yeah?" says a stranger, and pushes his way past. Then two people get together who have been to different places. Neither wants to hear about the other's summer, and neither does. Both talk at once and pull snapshots out of their pockets. "Here's where we used to take our lunch." "That's nothing. Steve had a friend up the lake who had a launch, and every day there was something doing over at the casino. And you ought to have seen Miriam. She was a sight." Pretty soon they come to blows, trying to make each other listen. The only trouble is they never quite kill each other. If only one could be killed, it would be a great help. The next ban on immigration should be on returning vacationists. Have government officials stationed in each city and keep everyone out who won't give a bond to shut up and go right to work. Chapter 34. Animal Stories. 1. How Georgie Dog Gets the Rubbers on the Guest Room Bed. Old Mother Nature gathered all her little pupils about her for the daily lesson in how the animals do the things they do. Every day Waldo Lizard, Edna Elephant, and Lawrence Walrus came to Mother Nature's school, and there they learned all about the useless feats performed by their brother and sister animals. "Today," says Mother Nature, "we shall find out how it is that Georgie Dog manages to get the muddy rubbers from the hall closet up the stairs and onto the nice white bedspread in the guest room. You must be sure to listen carefully and pay strict attention to what Georgie Dog says. Only don't take too much of it seriously, for Georgie is an awful liar." And sure enough, in came Georgie Dog, wagging his entire torso in a paroxysm of camaraderie, although everyone knew that he had no use for Waldo Lizard. "Tell us, Georgie," says Mother Nature, "how do you do your clever work of rubber dragging? We would like so much to know, wouldn't we, children?" "No, Mother Nature," came the instant response from the children. So Georgie Dog began.
"Well, I'll tell you. It's this way," he said, snapping at a fly. You have to be very niftig about it. First of all, I lie by the door of the hall closet until I see a nice pair of muddy rubbers kicked into it."
"How muddy ought they to be?" asked Edna Elephant, although little enough use she would have for the information.
"I am glad you asked that question," replied Georgie. "Personally, I like to have mud on them about the consistency of gurry. That is, not too wet, because then it will all drip off on the way upstairs. and not so dry that it scrapes off on the carpet, for we must save it all for the bedspread, you know. As soon as the rubbers are safely in the hall closet, I make a great deal of to-do about going into the other room in order to give the impression that there is nothing interesting enough in the hall to keep me there. A good loud yawn helps to disarm any suspicion of undue excitement. I sometimes even chew a bit of fringe on the sofa and take a scolding for it. Anything to draw attention from the rubbers. Then, when everyone is at dinner, I sneak out and drag them forth.
"And how do you manage to take them both at once?" piped up Lawrence Walrus.
"I am glad that you asked that question," said Georgie, "because I was trying to avoid it. You can never guess what the answer is. It is very difficult to take two at a time, so we usually have to take one and then go back and get the other. I had a cousin once who knew a grip which could be worked on the backs of overshoes, by means of which he could drag two at a time, but he was an exceptionally fine dragger. He once took a pair of rubber boots from the barn into the front room, where a wedding was taking place, and put them on the bride's train. Of course, not one dog in a million could hope to do that. Once upstairs, it is quite easy getting them into the guest room, unless the door happens to be shut. Then what do you think I do? I go around through the bathroom window onto the roof, and walk around to the sleeping porch, and climb down into the guest room that way. It is a lot of trouble, but I think that you will agree with me that the results are worth it. Climbing up on the bed with the rubbers in my mouth is difficult, but it doesn't make any difference if some of the mud comes off on the side of the bedspread. In fact, it all helps in the final effect. I usually try to smear them around when I get them at last on the spread, and if I can leave one of them on the pillow, I feel it's a pretty fine little old world after all. This done, I am off." And Georgie Dog suddenly disappeared in official pursuit of an automobile going 85 miles an hour. "So now," said Mother Nature to her little pupils, "we have heard all about Georgie Dog's work. Tomorrow we may listen to Lillian Mosquito tell how she makes her voice carry across a room." Animal Stories 2: How Lillian Mosquito Projects Her Voice. All the children came crowding around Mother Nature one cold, raw afternoon in summer, crying in unison, "Oh, Mother Nature, you promised us that you would tell us how Lillian Mosquito projects her voice. You promised that you would tell us how Lillian Mosquito projects her voice." So I did, says Mother Nature, laying down an oak, the leaves of which she was tipping with scarlet for the fall trade. "And so I will, At which Waldo Lizard, Edna Elephant, and Lawrence Walrus jumped with imitation joy, for they had hoped to have the afternoon off. Mother Nature led them across the fields to the piazza of a clubhouse, on which there was an exposed ankle belonging to one of the members. There, as she had expected, they found Lillian Mosquito having tea. "Lillian," called Mother Nature, "come off a minute. I have some little friends here who would like to know how it is that you manage to hum in such a manner as to give the impression of being just outside the ear of a person in bed, when actually you are across the room." "Will you kindly repeat the question?" says Lillian, flying over to the railing. "We want to know," said Mother Nature, "how it is that very often, when you have been fairly caught, it turns out that you have escaped without injury." "I would prefer to answer the question as it was first put," said Lillian. So Waldo Lizard, Edna Elephant, and Lawrence Walrus, seeing that there was no way out, cried, "Yes, yes, Lillian, do tell us." "First of all, you must know," began Lillian Mosquito, "that my chief duty is to annoy. Whatever else I do,
However many bites I total in the course of the evening, I do not consider that I have made good unless I have caused a great deal of annoyance while doing it. A bite, quietly executed and not discovered by the victim until morning, does me no good. It is my duty and my pleasure to play with him before biting, as you have often heard a cat plays with a mouse, tormenting him with apprehension and making him struggle to defend himself. If I am using too long words for you, please stop me."
"Stop!" cried Waldo Lizard, reaching for his hat, with the idea of possibly getting to the ballpark by the 5th inning. But he was prevented from leaving by kindly old Mother Nature, who stepped on him with her kindly old heel, and Lillian Mosquito continued.
"I must therefore, you see, be able to use my little voice with great skill. Of course, the first thing to do is to make my victim think that I am nearer to him than I really am. To do this, I sit quite still, let us say on the footboard of the bed, and beginning to hum in a very, very low tone of voice, increase the volume and raise the pitch gradually, thereby giving the effect of approaching the pillow. The man in bed thinks that he hears me coming toward his head, and I can often see him waiting with the clenched teeth until he thinks that I am near enough to swat. Sometimes I strike a quick little grace note, as if I were right above him and about to make a landing. It is great fun at such times to see him suddenly strike himself over the ear. They always think that I am right at their ear, and then feel carefully between his fingertips to see if he has caught me. Then, too, there is always the pleasure of thinking that perhaps he has hurt himself quite badly by the blow. I have often known victims of mine to deafen themselves permanently by jarring their eardrums in their wild attempts to catch me."
"What fun! What fun!" cried Edna Elephant. "I must try it myself just as soon as I get home."
"It is often a good plan to make believe that you have been caught after one of the swats," continued Lillian Mosquito, "and to keep quiet for a while. It makes him cocky. He thinks that he has demonstrated the superiority of man over the rest of the animals. Then he rolls over and starts to sleep. This is the time to begin work on him again. After he has slapped himself all over the face and head, and after he has put on the light and made a search of the room and then gone back to bed to think up some new words, that is the time when I usually bring the climax about. Gradually approaching him from the right, I hum loudly in his ear. Then, suddenly becoming quiet, I fly silently and quickly around to his neck. Just as he hits himself on the ear, I bite his neck and fly away. And voila, there you are."
"How true that is," said Mother Nature. "Voila, there we are. Come, children, let us go now, for we must be up bright and early tomorrow to learn how Lois Hen scratches up the beets and Swiss chard in the gentleman's gardens." Chapter 35. The Tariff Unmasked. Let us get this tariff thing cleared up once and for all. An explanation is due to the American people, and obviously this is the place to make it. Viewing the whole thing, schedule by schedule, we find it indefensible. In Schedule A alone, the list of necessities on which the tax is to be raised includes Persian berries, extract of nut galls, and isinglass. Take isinglass alone. With prices shooting up in this market, what is to become of our picture postcards? Where once for a nickel you could get a picture of the Woolworth building ablaze with lights with the sun setting and the moon rising in the background, under the proposed tariff it will easily set you back 15 cents. This is all very well for the rich who can get their picture postcards at wholesale, but how are the poor to get their art? The only justifiable increase in this schedule is on blues in pulp, dried, etc. If this will serve to reduce the amount of those lonesome, lonesome blues, and I've got the left all alone in the magazine reading room of the public library blues, with which our popular song market has been flooded for the past 5 years, we could almost bring ourselves to vote for the entire tariff bill as it stands. Schedule B. Here we find a tremendous increase in the tax on grindstones. Householders and travelers in general do not appreciate what this means. It means that next year, when you are returning from Europe, you will have to pay a duty on those Dutch grindstones that you always bring back to the cousins, a duty which will make the importation of more than 3 prohibitive. This will lead to an orgy of grindstone smuggling, making it necessary for hitherto respectable people to become lawbreakers by concealing grindstones about their clothing and in the trays of their trunks. Think this over. Schedule C. Right at the start of this list, we find charcoal bars being boosted. Have our children no rights? What is a train ride with children without Hershey's charcoal bars? Or gypsum? What is more picturesque on a ride through the countryside than a band of gypsum encamped by the road with their bright colors and gay tambourine playing? Are these simple folks to be kept out of this country simply because a Republican tariff insists on raising the tax on gypsum? Schedule D. A way to evade the injustice of this schedule is in the matter of marble slabs. Marble slabs rubbed are going to cost more to import than marble slabs unrubbed. What we are planning to do in this office is to get in a quantity of unrubbed marble slabs and then rub them ourselves. A coarse dry towel is very good for rubbing, they say. Any further discussion of the details of this iniquitous tariff would only enrage us to the point of incoherence. Perhaps a short list of some of the things you will have to do without under the new arrangement will serve to enrage you also. Senegal gum, buchu leaves, lava tips for burners, magic lantern strips, Spielgeilisen nut washers, butcher's skewers, and gun wads. Now, write to your congressman. This concludes Part 7 of Love Conquers All by Robert C. Benchley, read by Ted DeLorme for LibriVox. This book will continue on future files. Is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ted DeLorme in Fort Mill, South Carolina during July and August 2006. Love Conquers All by Robert C. Benchley. The remainder of this book is subtitled The Literary Department and contains Benchley's reviews of books, plays, etc. Chapter 36. Take Along a Book. There seems to be a concerted effort, manifest in the Take Along a Book drive, to induce vacationists to slip at least one volume into the trunk before getting Daddy to jump on it. This is a fine idea, for there is always a space between the end of the tennis racket and the box of soap in which the shoe whitening is liable to tip over unless you jam a book in with it. Any book will do. It is usually a book that you have been meaning to read all spring, one that you have got so used to lying about to people who have asked you if you have read it that you have almost kidded yourself into believing that you really have read it. You picture yourself out in the hammock or down on the rocks with a pillow under your head and pipe or a box of candy near at hand, just devouring page after page of it. The only thing that worries you is what you will read when you have finished that. Oh, well, you think, there will probably be some books in the town library. Maybe I can get Gibbon there. This summer will be a good time to read Gibbon through. Your trunk doesn't reach the cottage until 4 days after you arrive, owing to the ferry pilot's strike. You don't get it unpacked down as far as the layer in which the book is until you have been there a week. Then the book is taken out and put on the table. In transit, it has tried to eat its way through a pair of tramping boots, with the result that one corner and the first 20 pages have become dog-eared, but that won't interfere with its being read. Several other things do interfere, however. The nice weather, for instance. You start out from your room in the morning and somehow or other never get back to it except when you are in a hurry to get ready for meals or for bed. You try to read in bed one night, but you can't seem to fix your sunburned shoulders in a comfortable position. You take the book down to luncheon and leave it at the table. And you don't miss it for 3 days. When you find it again, it has large blisters on page 35 where some water has dropped on it. Then Mrs. Beatty, who lives in Montclair in the winter time, no matter where you go for the summer, you always meet some people who live in Montclair in the winter, borrows the book, as she has heard so much about it. 2 weeks later she brings it back and explains that Prince got hold of it one afternoon and chewed just a little of the back off, but says that she doesn't think it will be noticed when the book is in the bookcase. Back to the table in the bedroom it goes, and is used to keep unanswered postcards in. It is also convenient as a backing for cards which you yourself are writing. And the flyleaf makes an excellent place for a bridge score if there isn't any other paper handy. When it comes time to pack up for home, you shake the sand from among the leaves and save out the book to be read on the train, and you leave it in the automobile that takes you to the station. But for all that, take along a book. It might rain all summer. Chapter 37. Confessions of a Chess Champion. With the opening of the baseball season, the sporting urge stirs in one's blood, and we turn to such books as My Chess Career by J.R. Capablanca. Mr. Capablanca, I gather from his text, plays chess very well, wherein he unquestionably has something on me. His book is a combination of autobiography and pictorial examples of difficult games he has participated in and won. I could understand the autobiographical part perfectly, but although I have seen chess diagrams in the evening papers for years, I have never been able to become nervous over one. It has always seemed to me that when you have seen one diagram of a chessboard, you have seen them all. Therefore, I can give only a superficial review of the technical parts of Mr. Capablanca's book. His personal reminiscences, however, are full of poignant episodes. For instance, let us take an incident which occurred in his early boyhood, when he found out what sort of man his father really was. A somber event in the life of any boy, much more so for the boy Capablanca. I was born in Havana, the capital of the island of Cuba, he says, the 19th of November, 1888. I was not yet 5 years old when by accident I came into my father's private office and found him playing with another gentleman. I had never seen a game of chess before. The pieces interested me, and I went the next day to see them play again. The third day, as I looked on, my father, a very poor beginner, moved a knight from a white square to another white square. His opponent, apparently not a better player, did not notice it. My father won, and I proceeded to call him a cheat and to laugh. Imagine the feelings of a young boy entering his father's private office and seeing a man whom he had been brought up to love and to revere moving a knight from one white square to another. It is a wonder that the boy had the courage to grow up at all with a start in life like that. But he did grow up, and at the age of 8, in spite of the advice of doctors, he was a frequent visitor at the Havana Chess Club. As he says in describing this period of his career, "Soon Don Celso Golmayo, the strongest player there, was unable to give me a rook." So you can see how good he was. Don Celso couldn't give him a rook. And if Don Celso couldn't, who on earth could? In his introduction, Mr. Capablanca, I wish that I could get it out of my head that Mr. Capablanca is possibly a relation of the Casablanca boy who did the right thing by the burning deck. They are, of course, two entirely different people. In his introduction, Mr. Capablanca says, "Conceit I consider a foolish thing, but more foolish still is that false modesty that vainly attempts to conceal that which all facts tend to prove. It is this straining to overcome a foolish false modesty which leads him to say, in connection with his matches with members of the Manhattan Chess Club, 'As one by one I mowed them down without the loss of a single game, my superiority became apparent.' Or, in speaking of his endings, a term we chess experts use to designate the last part of our game, to murmur modestly, 'The endings I have already played very well, and to my mind had attained the high standard for which they were in the future to be well known.' Mr. Capablanca will have to watch that false modesty of his. It will get him into trouble some day." Although this column makes no pretense of carrying sporting news, it seems only right to print a part of the running story of the big game between Capablanca and Dr. O.S. Bernstein in the San Sebastian tournament of 1911. Capablanca wore the white, while Dr. Bernstein upheld the honor of the black. The tense moment of the game had been reached. Capablanca has the ball on Dr. Bernstein's 3-yard line on the second down, with a minute and a half to play. The stands are wild. Cries of "Hold 'em, Bernstein!" and "Touchdown, Capablanca!" ring out on the frosty November air. Brave voices are singing the fighting song entitled "Capablanca's Day," which runs as follows: "Oh, sweep, sweep across the board with your castles, queens, and pawns. We are with you, all Havana's horde, till the sun of victory dawns. Then it's fight, fight, fight to your last white knight, for the truth must win alway. And our hearts beat true, old JR, for you on Capablanca's Day." Up to this point, the game had proceeded along the lines generally recommended by the masters, writes Capablanca. The last move, however, is a slight deviation from the regular course, which brings this knight back to B in order to leave open the diagonal for the queen, and besides, is more in accordance with the defensive nature of the game. Much more could be said as to the reasons that make knight to bishop the preferred move of most masters. Of course, lest there be some misapprehension, let me state that the move knight to bishop is made in conjunction with king's rook to king, which comes first. It is lucky that Mr. Casablanca made that explanation, for I was being seized with just that misapprehension which he feared. Mr. Capablanca, I mean. Below is the box score by innings. 1, pawn to king 4. Pawn to king 4. 2, knight to queen's bishop 3. Knight to queen's bishop 3. 3, pawn to bishop 4. Pawn takes pawn. 4, knight to bishop 3. Pawn to king's knight 4. Game called on account of darkness. Chapter 38. Rip Van Winkle. After all, there is nothing like a good folk opera for wholesome fun, and the boy who can turn out a rollicking folk opera for old and young is Percy MacKaye. His latest is a riot from start to finish. You can buy it in book form, published by Knopf. Just ask for Rip Van Winkle and spend the evening falling out of your chair. You wake up just as soon as you fall and are all ready again for a fresh start. Of course, it is a little rough in spots, but you know what Percy MacKaye is when he gets loose on a folk opera. It is good, clean Rabelaisian fun, such as was in Washington, the Man Who Made Us. I always felt that it was very prudish of the police to stop that play just as it was commencing its run. Or maybe it wasn't the police that stopped it. Something did, I remember. But Rip Van Winkle has much more zip to it than Washington had. In the first place, the lyrics are better. They have more of a lilt to them than the lines of the earlier work had. Here is the song hit of the first act, sung by the Goose Girl. Try this over on your piano. Catterskill, cloud on the Catterskill, will it be fair or lower? Silver rings on my pond I see, and my gander he shook both his white wings like a sunshine shower. I venture to say that Irving Berlin himself couldn't have done anything catchier than that by way of a lyric. Or this little snatch of a refrain sung by the old women of the town. Nay, 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 a sunshine shower won't last half an hour. The trouble with most lyrics is that they are written by songwriters who have had no education. Mr. McKay's college training shows itself in every line of the opera. There is a subtlety of rhyme scheme, a delicacy of meter, and above all, an originality of thought and expression which promises much for the school of university-bred lyricists. Here, for instance, is a lyric which Joe McCarthy could never have written. Up spoke Nancy, spanking Nancy, says my feet are far too dancy, dancy-o. So foot on the grass, foot on the grass, foot on the grass is my fancy-o. Of course, this is a folk opera, and you can get away with a great deal of that dancy-o stuff when you call it a folk opera. You can throw it all back on the old folk at home and they can't say a word. But even the local wits of Rip Van Winkle's time would have repudiated the comedy lines which Mr. McKay gives to Rip to say, in which Katie did and Katie didn't figure prominently as the nub, followed, before you have time to stop laughing, by one about Whip Poor Will. Whip Poor Will. Get it? If Rip Van Winkle is ever produced again, Ed Wynn should be cast as Rip. He would eat that line alive. Ed Wynn, by the way, might do wonders by the opera if he could get the rights to produce it in his own way. Let Mr. McKay's name stay on the program, but give Ed Wynn the white card to do as he might see fit with the book. For instance, one of Mr. McKay's characters is named Dirk Spuitenturvel. Let him stand as he is, but give him two cousins, Mynheer Jonkers and Jan 183rd Street. The three of them could do a comedy tumbling act. There is practically no end to the features that could be introduced to tone the thing up. The basic idea of Rip Van Winkle would lend itself admirably to Broadway treatment, for Mr. McKay has taken liberties with the legend and introduced the topical idea of a magic flask containing a homemade hooch. Hendrick Hudson, the captain of the Catskill bowling team, is the lucky possessor of the doctor's prescription and formula, and it is in order to take a trial spin with the brew that Rip first goes up to the mountain. Here are Hendrick's very words of invitation.
You'll be right welcome. I will let you taste a wonder drink we brew aboard the Half Moon. Whoever drinks the magic flask thereof forgets all lapse of time and wanders ever in the fairy season of youth and spring. Come, join me in the mountains at mid of night, and there I promise you the magic flask.
And so, at mid of night, Rip fell for the promise of wandering in the fairy season, as so many have done at the invitation of a man who has made a little something at home which you couldn't tell from the real stuff.
Rip got out of it easily. He simply went to sleep for 20 years. You ought to see a man I know. There is a note in the front of the volume saying that no public reading of Rip Van Winkle may be given without first getting the author's permission. It ought to be made much more difficult to do than that.
Chapter 39. Literary Lost and Found Department, with scant apology to the book section of the New York Times. Old Black Tilly, HGL. When I was a little girl, my nurse used to recite a poem something like the following, as near as I can remember. I wonder if anyone can give me the missing lines. Old Black Tilly lived in the dell, hi-ho with a rum-tum-tum. Something, something, something like a lot of hell, hi-ho with a rum-tum-tum. She wasn't very something, and she wasn't very fat, but... Victor Hugo's death. MKC. Is it true that Victor Hugo did not die, but is still living in a little shack in Colorado? I'm sorry that I spelt the word. J.R.A. Can anyone help me out by furnishing the last 3 words to the following stanza, which I learned in school, and of which I have forgotten the last 3 words, thereby driving myself crazy? I'm sorry that I spelt the word. I hate to go above you, because the brown eyes lower fell, because you see... blank, blank, blank. God's in his heaven. J.A.E. Where did Mark Twain write the following? God's in his heaven, all's right with the world. She dwelt beside. N.K.Y. Can someone locate this for me and tell the author? She dwelt among untrodden ways, beside the springs of Dove. To me she gave sweet charity, but greater far is love. The Golden Wedding. KLF. Who wrote the following, and what does it mean? Oh, die golden wedding, oh, die golden wedding, oh, die golden wedding, die golden, golden wedding. Answers. When Grandma Was a Girl, Luther F. Neame, Flushing, Long Island. The poem asked for by E.J.K. was recited at a Free Soil riot in Ashburg, Kansas, in July 1850. It was entitled, And That's the Way They Did It When Grandma Was a Girl, and was written by Bishop Leander B. Rizzard. The last line runs, And that's the way they did it when Grandma was a girl. Others who answered this query were Lillian W. East of Albany, Martin B. Forsch, New York City, and Henry Cabot Lodge, Nahant. Let us then be up and doing. Roger F. Nilkett, Presto, New Jersey, replying to the query in your last issue concerning the origin of the lines, Let us then be up and doing with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait. I remember hearing these lines read at a gathering in the Second Baptist Church of Presto, New Jersey, when I was a young man, by the Reverend Harley N. Ankle. It was said at the time among his parishioners that he himself wrote them, and on being questioned on the matter he did not deny it, simply smiling and saying, I'm glad if you liked them. They were henceforth known in Presto as Dr. Ankle's verse, and were set to music and sung at his funeral. The December Bride, or Old Robin. Charles B. Rennett, Boston, New Hampshire. The whole poem wanted by H.J.O. is as follows, and appeared in Hostetter's Annual in 1843. 'Twas in the bleak December that I took her for my bride. How well do I remember how she fluttered by my side. My Nelly dear, it was not long before you up and died, and they buried her at 8:30 in the morning. Oh, do not tell me of the charms of maidens far and near. Their charming ways and manners I do not care to hear, for Lucy dear was to me so very, very dear, and they buried her at 8:30 in the morning. Then it's merrily, 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 woe, to the old gray church they come and go, some to be married and some to be buried, and old Robin has gone for the mail. The Old King's Joke. F. J. Bruff, Hammock, Connecticut. In a recent issue of your paper, Lillian F. Grothman asked for the remainder of a poem which began, "The King of Sweden made a joke, ha ha." I can furnish all of this poem, having written it myself, for which I was expelled from St. Domino's School in 1895. If Miss Grothman will meet me in the green room at the Biltmore for tea on Wednesday next at 4:30, she will be supplied with the missing words. Chapter 40. Dark Water. We have so many problems in America. Books are constantly being written offering solutions for them, but still they persist. There are volumes on auction bridge, family budgets, and mind training. A great many people have ideas on what should be done to relieve the country of certain undesirable persons who have displayed a lack of sympathy with American institutions, as if American institutions needed sympathy. And some of the more generous-minded among us are writing books showing our duty to the struggling young nationalities of Europe. It is bewildering to be confronted by all these problems, each demanding intelligent solution. Little wonder, then, that we have no time for writing books on the one problem which is exclusively our own. With so many wrongs in the world to be righted, who can blame us for overlooking the one tragic wrong which lies at our door? With so many heathen to whom the word of God must be brought, and so many wild revolutionists in whom must be instilled a respect for law and order, is it strange that we should ourselves sometimes lump the word of God and the principles of law and order together under the head of sentimentality and shrug our shoulders? Justice in the abstract is our aim. Any American will tell you that. So why haggle over details and insist on justice for the Negro? But W.E.B. Du Bois does insist on justice for the Negro, and in his book Dark Water, Harcourt, Brace and Company, his voice rings out in a bitter warning through the complacent quiet which usually reigns around this problem of America. Mr. Du Bois seems to forget that we have the affairs of a great many people to attend to, and persists in calling our attention to this affair of our own. And what is worse, in the minds of all well-bred persons, he does not do it at all politely. He seems to be quite distressed about something. Maybe it is because he finds himself, a man of superior mind and of sensitive spirit, who is a graduate of Harvard, a professor, and a sincere worker for the betterment of mankind, relegated to an inferior order by many men and women who are obviously his inferiors, simply because he happens to differ from them in the color of his skin. Maybe it is because he sees the people of his own race who have not had his advantages, if a Negro may ever be said to have received an advantage, being crowded into an ignominious spiritual serfdom equally as bad as the physical serfdom from which they were so recently freed. Maybe it is because of these things that Mr. Du Bois seems overwrought. Or perhaps it is because he reads each day of how jealous we are, as a nation, of the sanctity of our Constitution, how we revere it and draw a flashing sword against its detractors, and then sees this very Constitution being flouted as a matter of course in those districts where the amendment giving the Negroes a right to vote is popularly considered one of the 5 funniest jokes in the world. Perhaps he hears candidates for office insisting on a reign of law or a plea for order above all things by some sentimentalist or other, or public speakers advising those who have not respect for American institutions to go back whence they came, and then sees whole sections of the country violating every principle of law and order and mocking American institutions for the sake of teaching a nigger his place. Perhaps, during the war, he heard of the bloody crimes of our enemies, and saw preachers and editors and statesmen stand aghast at the barbaric atrocities which won for the German the name of Hun, and then looked towards his own people and saw them being burned, disemboweled, and tortured with a civic unanimity and tacit legal sanction which made the word Hun sound weak. Perhaps he has heard it boasted that in America every man who is honest, industrious, and intelligent has a good chance to win out, and has seen honest, industrious, and intelligent men whose skins are black stopped short by a wall so high and so thick that all they can do, on having reached that far, is to bow their heads and go slowly back. Any one of these reasons should have been sufficient for having written Darkwater. It is unfortunate that Mr. Du Bois should have raised this question of our own responsibility just at this time when we were showing off so nicely. It may remind someone that instead of taking over a protectorate of Armenia, we might better take over a protectorate of the state of Georgia, which yearly leads the proud list of lynchers. But then there will not be enough people who see Mr. Du Bois's book to cause any great national movement. So we are quite sure, for the time being, of being able to devote our energies to the solution of our other problems. Don't forget, therefore, to write your congressman about a universal daylight saving bill, and give a little thought, if you can, to the question of the vehicular tunnel. This concludes Part 8 of Love Conquers All by Robert C. Benchley, read by Ted DeLorme for LibriVox. This book will continue on future files. Is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ted DeLorme in Fort Mill, South Carolina, during July and August 2006. Love Conquers All by Robert C. Benchley. Chapter 41: The New Timetable. The new timetable of the New York Central Railroad, New York Central Railroad Harlem Division, Form 113, corrected to March 28, 1922, is an attractive folder, done in black and white for the suburban trade. It slips neatly into the pocket, where it easily becomes lost among letters and bills, appearing again only when you have procured another. So much for its physical features. Of the text matter, it is difficult to write without passion. No more disheartening work has been put on the market this season. In an attempt to evade the daylight savings law, the New York Central has kept its clocks at what is called Eastern Standard Time, meaning that it is standard on East 42nd Street between Vanderbilt and Lexington Avenues. Practically everywhere else in New York, the clocks are an hour ahead. It is this Eastern Standard Time that gives the timetable its distinctive flavor. Each train has been demoted 1 hour, and then, for fear that it would be too easy to understand this, an extra 3 or 4 minutes have been thrown in or taken out, just so that no mistake can help being made. In order to read the new timetable understandingly, the following procedure is now necessary. Take a room in some quiet family hotel where the noise from the street is reduced to minimum. Place the timetable on the writing desk and sit in front of it, holding a pencil in the right hand and a watch, Eastern Christian Time, in the left. Then decide on the time you think you would like to reach home. Let us say that you usually have dinner at 7. You would, if you could do just what you wanted, reach Valhalla at 6:30. Very well. It takes about an hour from the Grand Central Terminal to Valhalla. How about a train leaving around 5:30? Look at the timetable for a train which leaves about 2:45 Eastern Standard Time. Write down 2:45 on a piece of paper. Add 150. Subtract the number of stations that Valhalla is above White Plains. Sharpen your pencil and bind up your cut finger and subtract the number you first thought of, and the result will show the number of presidents of the United States who have been assassinated while in office. Then go over to the Grand Central Terminal and ask one of the information clerks what you want to know. They will be glad to see you, for during the last 3 days they have been actually hungering for the sight of a human face. Sometimes it has seemed to them that the silence and loneliness there behind the information counter would drive them mad. If someone, anyone, would only come and speak to them. That is why one of them is over in the corner chewing up timetables into small balls and playing marbles with them. He has gone mad from loneliness. The other clerk, the one who is looking at the tip of his nose and mumbling Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, has only a few more minutes before he too succumbs. And that low rumbling sound, what is it? It comes from the crowd of commuters standing in front of the gate of what used to be the 556. Let us draw near and hear what they are discussing. Why, it is the new timetable of all things.
Listen, Ed, this is how it goes. This train that goes at 4:25 according to this timetable is really the old 5:20, see? What you do is add an hour. Oh, what kind of talk is that? Add an hour to your grandmother. You subtract an hour from the time as given here. This is Eastern Standard Time. See, it says right here, the time shown in this folder is Eastern Standard Time. 1 hour slower than Daylight Savings Time. See? 1 hour slower. You subtract. You guys are both way off. I just asked one of the trainmen. The 556 is gone. It went at 4:20. The next train that we get is the 6:20, which goes at 5:19. Look, see here. It says 5:19 on the timetable, but that means that by your watch it is 6:19. Well, by my watch it is not 6:19. My watch I set by the clock in the station this morning when I came in. Well, the clock in the station is wrong. That is, the clock in the station is an hour ahead of all the other clocks. An hour ahead? An hour behind, you mean? No, the clock in the station is an hour ahead. I know what I'm talking about. Now listen, Joe. Didn't you see in the paper Monday morning? Yes, I saw in the paper Monday morning, and it said that, look, Gus, by my watch, look, Gus, listen, Gus, by my watch. You and your watch. What's that got to do with it? Now look here. On this timetable, it says, listen, Eddie. Whatever else its publishers may say about it, the new New York Central Timetable bids fair to be the most talked of publication of the season. Chapter 42. Mr. Bach's Americanization. If ever you should feel important enough to write an autobiography to give to the world, and dislike to say all the nice things about yourself that you feel really ought to be said, just write it in the third person. Edward Bach has done this in The Americanization of Edward Bach, and the effect is quite touching in its modesty.
In an explanation at the beginning of the book, Mr. Bok disclaims any credit for the winning ways and remarkable success of his hero, Edward Bok. Edward Bok, the little Dutch boy who landed in America in 1870 and later became the editor of the greatest women's advertising medium in the country, is an entirely different person from the Edward Bok who is telling the story. You understand this to begin with. Otherwise, you may misjudge the author. I have again and again found myself, writes Mr. Bok, watching with intense amusement and interest the Edward Bok of this book at work. His tastes, his outlook, his manner of looking at things were totally at variance with my own. He has had and has been a personality apart from my private self. The only connection between Edward Bok the editor and Edward Bok the autobiographer seems to be that Editor Bok allows Author Bok to have a checking account in his bank under their common name. Thus, completely detached from his hero, Mr. Bok proceeds and is able to narrate on page 3, in the manner of Horatio Alger, how young Edward, taunted by his Brooklyn schoolmates, gave a sound thrashing to the ringleader, after which he found himself looking into the eyes of a crowd of very respectful boys and giggling girls, who readily made a passageway for his brother and himself when they indicated a desire to leave the schoolyard and go home. He can also, without seeming in the least conceited, tell how, through his clear-sighted firmness in refusing to write in the Spencerian manner prescribed in school, he succeeded in bringing the principal and the whole Board of Education to their senses, resulting in a complete reversal of the public school policy in the matter of handwriting instruction. The Horatio Alger note is dominant throughout the story of young Edward's boyhood. His cheerfulness and business sagacity so impressed everyone with whom he came in contact that he was soon outdistancing all the other boys in the process of self-advancement, and no one is more smilingly tolerant of the irresistible progress of young Edward Bok in making friends and money than Edward Bok, the impersonal author of the book. He just loves to see the young boy get ahead. It will perhaps aid in getting an idea of the personality and confident presence of the boy Bok to state that he was a feverish collector of autographs. Whenever any famous personage came to town, the young man would find out at what hotel he was staying and would proceed to hound him until he had got him to write his name with some appropriate sentiment in a little book. In advertising the present volume, the publishers gave a list of names of historical characters who feature in Mr. Bok's reminiscences: Generals Grant and Garfield, Oliver Wendell Holmes, Longfellow, Emerson, and dozens of others. And so they do figure in the book, but as victims of the young Dutch boy's passion for autographs. Still, perhaps they did not mind, for the author gives us to understand that they were all so charmed with the prepossessing manner and intelligent bearing of the young autographed hound that they not only were continually asking him to dinner — he usually timed his visit so as to catch them just as they were entering the dining room — but insisted on giving him letters of introduction to their friends. Only Mrs. Abraham Lincoln and Ralph Waldo Emerson neglected to register extreme pleasure at being approached by the smiling lad. Both Mrs. Lincoln and Emerson were failing in their minds at the time, however, which satisfactorily explains their coolness, at least for the author. In Mrs. Lincoln's case, an attempt was made to interest her in an autographed photograph of General Grant, but Edward saw that the widow of the great Lincoln did not mentally respond to his pleasure in his possession. Could it have been possible that the widow of the great Lincoln was a trifle bored? The account of the intrusion on Emerson in Concord borders on the sacrilegious. Here was the venerable philosopher, 5 months before his death, when his great mind had already gone on before him, being visited by a strange lad with a passion for autographs, who sat and watched for those lucid moments when the sun would break through the clouded brain, making it possible for Emerson to hold the pen and form the letters of his name. Then young Edward was off, with another trophy in his belt and another stride made in his progress toward Americanization. Lovers of Emerson could wish that the impersonal editor of these memoirs had omitted the account of this victory. Americanization seems, from the present document, to consist of, first, making as many influential friends as possible who may be able to help you at some future time. Second, making as much money as possible. Young Edward used his position as stenographer to Jay Gould to glean tips on the market, thereby cleaning up for himself and his Sunday school teacher at Plymouth Church. And third, keeping your eye open for the main chance. In conclusion, nothing more fitting could be quoted than the touching caption under the picture of the author's grandmother, who counseled each of her children to make the world a better and more beautiful place to live in. A counsel which is now being carried on by her grandchildren, one of whom is Edward Bach. Could detachment of author and hero be more complete? Chapter 43. Zane Grey's Movie. The hum of the moving picture machine is the predominating note in The Mysterious Rider, Zane Grey's latest contribution to the literature of unrealism. All that is necessary for a complete illusion is the insertion of 3 or 4 news photographs at the end, showing how they catch salmon in the Columbia River, the allegorical floats in the Los Angeles Carnival of Roses, and the ice-covered fire ruins in the business section of Worcester, Mass. In order that the change from book to film may be made as quickly as possible, the author has written his story in the language of the moving picture subtitle. All that the continuity writer in the studio will have to do will be to take every third sentence from the book and make a subtitle from it. We might save him the trouble and do it here, together with some suggestions for incidental decorations. Remember, nothing will be quoted below which is not in the exact wording of Zane Grey's text. We first see Columbine Belllounds, adopted daughter of old Belllounds, the rancher of Colorado. She is riding along the trail overlooking the valley. Today, girlish ordeals and griefs seemed back in the past. She was a woman at 19 and face to face with the first great problem in her life. Suggestion for title decoration: a pair of reluctant feet standing at the junction of a brook and a river. She stops to pick some columbines and soliloquizes. The author says, "She spoke aloud, as if the sound of her voice might convince her." But it is not clear from the text just what she expected to be convinced of. Here is her argument to herself.
Columbine. So they named me. Those miners who found me, a baby, lost in the woods, asleep among the columbines.
Decorative nasturtiums. Having convinced herself in these reassuring words as she stands alone on the ridge in God's great outdoors, she explains that she is promised to marry Jack Belllounds, the worthless son of her foster father, although anyone can tell that she is in love with Wilson Moore, a cowpuncher on the ranch. You will understand what a sacrifice this was to be when the author says that the lower part of Jack Belllounds' face was weak. To the ranch comes Hell-Bent Wade, the mysterious man of the plains. He applies for a job, and not only that, but he gets it. which gives him a chance to let us know that 18 years ago he had driven the woman he loved away from him, out into the world with her baby girl. Jealous fool! Too late had he discovered his fatal blunder. That was Bent Wade's secret. Fancy sketch of a secret. And as we already know that Columbine is almost 19, I think she told herself this fact aloud once when she was out riding alone, just to convince herself, the shock is not so great as it might have been to hear Wade murmur aloud, doubtless to convince himself too, "Baby would have been, let's see, most 19 years old now, if she'd lived." Any bets on who Columbine really is? Let us digress from the scenario a minute to cite a scintillating passage, one of many in the book. Wade is speaking. "You can never tell what a dog is until you know him. Dogs are like men. Some of them look good, but they're really bad. And that works the other way around." Oscar Wilde stuff, that is. How often have you felt the truth of what Mr. Gray says here, and yet have never been able to put it into words? It is this ability to put thoughts into words that makes him one of our most popular authors today. But enough of this. Hell-bent Wade determines that his little girl shall not know him as her father, and furthermore, that she shall not marry Jack Belllounds. So he goes to the cabin of Wilsmore and tells him that Columbine is unhappy at the thought of her approaching, you guessed it, nuptials. "Pard, she loves me. Still? Well, hers is the kind that grows stronger with time, I know." A heart with an hourglass intertwined. Let it be said right here, however, that Jack Belllounds, rough and villainous as he is the kind of cowpuncher who says to his father, "I still love you, Dad, despite the cruel thing you did to me." No cowpuncher who says "despite" can be entirely bad. Neither can he be a cowpuncher. It is later, after a thrilling series of physical encounters, that Columbine tells Jack Belllounds in so many words that she loves Wilsmore. Then Wade saw the glory of her, saw her mother again in that proud, fierce uplift of face that flamed red and then blazed white, saw hate and passion and love in all their primal nakedness.
Love him? Love Wilson Moore? Yes, you fool, I love him. Yes, yes, yes. Decorative heart in which a little door slowly opens, showing the face of Columbine.
But time is short, and there is a Salmon comedy to follow immediately after this. So all that we can divulge is that Jack has Wilsmore wrongly accused of cattle rustling, bringing down on his own head the following chatty bit from his affianced bride.
"So that's your revenge? But you're to reckon with me, Jack Belllounds. You villain, you devil, you..."
It would be unfair to the millions of readers who will struggle for possession of these circulating library copies of The Mysterious Rider to tell just what happens after this. But need we hesitate to divulge that the final subtitle will be "I have faith and hope and love, for I am his daughter." A faint cool breeze strayed through the aspens, rustling the leaves whisperingly, and the slender columbines, gleaming pale in the twilight, lifted their sweet faces. Decorative bull. Chapter 44, Suppressing Jurgen. Of course, it was silly to suppress Jurgen. That goes without saying. But it seems equally silly, because of its being suppressed, to hail it as high art. It is simply Mr. James Branch Cabell's quaint way of telling a raw story, and it isn't particularly his own way either. Personally, I like the modern method much better. Jurgen is a frank imitation of the old-time pornographers, and although it is a very good imitation, it need not rank Mr. Cabell any higher than the maker of a plaster of Paris copy of some Boeotian sculptural oddity. The author, in defense of his fortunate book, lifts his eyebrows and says, "Honnête soit." He claims, and quite rightly, that everything he has written has at least one decent meaning, and that anyone who reads anything indecent into it automatically convicts himself of being in a pathological condition. The question is, if Mr. Cabell had been convinced beforehand that nowhere in all this broad land would there be anyone who would read another meaning into his lily-white words, would he ever have bothered to write the book at all? Mr. Cabell is admittedly a genealogist. He is an earnest student of the literature of past centuries. He has become so steeped in the phrases and literary mannerisms of the Middle and Upper Middle Ages that, even in his book of modern essays, Beyond Life, he is constantly emitting strange words which were last used by the correspondents who covered the Crusades. No man has to be as artificially obsolete as Mr. Cabell is. He likes to be. In Jurgen he has simply let himself go. There is no pretense of writing like a modern. There is no pretense of writing in the style of even James Branch Cabell. It is frankly in the manner of those ancient authors whose works are sold surreptitiously to college students by gentlemen who whisper their selling talk behind a line of red sample bindings. And it is not in the manner of Rabelais, although Rabelais' name has been frequently used in describing Jurgen. Rabelais seldom hid his thought behind two meanings. There was only one meaning, and you could take it or leave it. And Rabelais would never have said honnête soit by way of defense. The general effect is one of Fielding or Sterne telling the story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, with their own embellishments, to the boys at the club. If all that is necessary to produce a work of art is to take a drummer's story and tell it in dusty English, we might try our luck with the modern smoking car yarn about the traveling man who came to the country hotel late at night, and see how far we can get with it in the manner of James Branch Cabell imitating Fielding, imitating someone else. It is a tale which they narrate in Nouveau Rochelle, saying, "In the old days there came one night a traveling man to an inn, and the night was late, and he was sore beset, what with ragtag and bobtail. Eftsoons he made known his wants to the churl behind the desk, who was named Gogirvan, and thus he spake: 'Any rooms?' 'Indeed, no, sir,' was Gogirvan's glose. 'Now but this is a deplorable thing, God wot,' says the traveling man. 'Fie, brother, but you think awry. Come, don smart your thinking cap, and answer me again. An you have forgot my query, it was, any rooms, beau?' Whereat the churl behind the desk gat him down from his stool, and closet one eye in a wink. 'There is one room,' he says, and places his forefinger along the side of his nose, in the manner of a man who places his forefinger along the side of his nose. But at this point I am stopped short by the warning passage through the room of a cold, damp current of air as from the grave, and I know that it is one of Mr. Sumner's vice-deputies flitting by on his rounds in defense of the public morals. So I can go no further, for public morals must be defended even at the cost of public morality. A statement which means nothing, but which sounds rather well, I think. I shall try to work it in again sometime. But perhaps enough has been said to show that it is perfectly easy to write something that will sound classic if you can only remember enough old words. When Mr. Cabell has learned the language, he ought to write a good book in modern English. There are lots of people who read it, and they speak very highly of it as a means of expression. But there are certain things that you cannot express in it without sounding crass, which would be a disadvantage in telling a story like Jurgen. Chapter 45. Anti-Ibáñez. While on the subject of books which we read because we think we ought to, and while Vicente Blasco Ibáñez is on the ocean and can't hear what is being said, let's form a secret society. I will be one of any three to meet behind a barn and admit that I would not give a good gosh darn if a fortune teller were to tell me tomorrow that I should never, never have a chance to read another book by the great Spanish novelist. Any of the American reading public who desire to join this secret society may do so without fear of publicity, as the names will not be given out. The only means of distinguishing a fellow member will be a tiny gold emblem to be worn in the lapel, representing the figure couchant of Spain's most touted animal. The motto will be Nimmermehr, which is a German translation of the Spanish phrase, "Not even once again." Simply because I myself am not impressed by a book, I have no authority to brand anyone who does not like it as a poseur and say that he is only making believe that he likes it. And there must be a great many highly literary people who really and sincerely do think that Señor Blasco's books are the finest novels of the epoch. It would therefore be presumptuous of me to say that Spain is now, for the first time since before 1898, in a position to kid the United States, and vicariously, through watching her famous son count his royalties and gate receipts, to feel avenged for the loss of her islands. If America has found something superfine in Ibáñez that his countrymen have missed, then America is of course to be congratulated and not kidded. But probably no one was more surprised than Blasco when he suddenly found himself a lion in our literary arena instead of in his accustomed role of bull in his home ring. And those who know say that you could have knocked his compatriots over with a feather when the news came that old man Ibáñez's son had made good in the United States to the extent of something like 500 million pesetas. For, like the prophet whom someone was telling about, Ibáñez was not known at home as a particularly hot tamale. But then he never had such a persistent publisher in Spain, and book advertising is not the art there that it is in America. When the final accounting of the great success of The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse in this country is taken, honorable mention must be made of the man at the E.P. Dutton & Company store who had charge of the advertising. The great Spanish novelist was in the French propaganda service during the war. It was his job to make Germany unpopular in Spanish. The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse is obviously propaganda, and not particularly subtle propaganda either. Certain chapters might have to come direct from our own Creel Committee, and one may still be true to the Allied cause and yet maintain that propaganda and literature do not mix with any degree of illusion. There is no question, of course, that those chapters in the book which are descriptive of the advance and subsequent retreat of the German troops Under the Eye of Don Marcelo are masterpieces of descriptive reporting. But Philip Gibbs has given us a whole book of masterpieces of descriptive reporting which do not bear the stamp of approval of the official Propaganda Bureau. And furthermore, Philip Gibbs does not wear a sports shirt open at the neck. At least, he never had his picture taken that way. As for the rest of the books that were dragged out from the Spanish for storehouse when the Four Horsemen romped in winners, I can speak only as I would speak of the world's most famous battles or heroines in Shakespeare. I have looked them over. I gave Mare Nostrum a great deal of my very valuable time because the advertisements spoke so highly of it. Woman Triumphant took less time because I decided to stop earlier in the book. Blood and Sand I passed up, having once seen a Madrid bullfight for myself, which may account for this nasty attitude I have toward any Spanish product. I am told, however, that this is the best of them all. It is remarkable that for a writer who seems to have left such an indelible imprint in the minds of the American people, whose works have been ranked with the greatest of all time, and who received more publicity during one day of his visit here than Charles Dickens received during his whole sojourn in America, Signor Blasco and his works form a remarkably small part of the spontaneous literary conversation of the day. The characters which he has created have not taken any appreciable hold in the public imagination. Their names are never used as examples of anything. Who were some of his chief characters, by the way? What did they say that was worth remembering? What did they do that characters have not been doing for many generations? Did you ever hear anyone say, "He talks like a character in Ibáñez," or "This might have happened in one of Ibáñez's books"? Of course, it is possible for a man to write a great book from which no one would quote. That is probably happening all the time, but it is because no one has read it. Here we have an author whose vogue in this country, according to statistics, is equal to that of any writer of novels in the world. And as soon as his publicity department stops functioning, I should like to lay a little bet that he will not be heard of again. This ends Section 9 of Love Conquers All by Robert C. Benchley, read by Ted DeLorme for LibriVox. This book will continue on future files.